The phone on the passenger seat wouldn't stop vibrating, and the screen kept lighting up with the same notification that said low storage and then another one that said 2 missed calls from unknown. Officer Dana Ruiz didn't touch it yet because the man walking ahead of her patrol car had his shoulders pulled up like he was trying to disappear into his own hoodie, even though it was already warm for that early hour. She had been pacing him for 3 blocks with her hazards on, and he still didn't look back. He just kept moving one foot in front of the other along the edge of the road like it was normal to be out here before sunrise with no sidewalk and no ride and no plan. His work boots were torn at the sides, and every few steps his heel slipped like the shoe didn't fit anymore. Dana watched his hands.
No angry gestures. No wild energy.
Just clenched fists and a face that looked tired in a way she recognized from her own mirror after night shift. She rolled down the window and called out, calm and careful, "Hey man.
You okay?
Where you headed?" He finally turned and his eyes were wet but not dramatic, just exhausted, like he'd already cried hours ago and didn't have anything left. Phoenix looked clean from a distance. That was the lie the sun told every morning when it hit the glass buildings downtown and made everything sparkle. Up close, it was heat and dust and people holding their lives together with receipts and late notices and tough smiles. Marcus Hill had learned to walk with his head slightly down not because he was ashamed, but because he was trying to conserve something inside himself. Energy.
Pride.
Patience. The things that ran out faster than money. He lived in a faded apartment complex near Maryvale, the kind with a small pool nobody used in winter and a laundry room that always smelled like bleach and old coins. The rent had climbed twice in 1 year, and his paycheck hadn't. He worked at a distribution warehouse on the west side where the air smelled like cardboard and diesel. The job was honest and steady when it was steady, but the schedule moved like a shifting floor. Some weeks they had overtime. Some weeks they sent people home early with a shrug and a, "Sorry, slow today." Marcus never complained out loud. He just nodded and did the math in his head all day, the way some people prayed. His car had died 3 months ago on the I-10 ramp after a long shift.
The engine made a sound like a heart full of rocks and nothing.
A tow cost more than he had. A mechanic looked at it once and said words that made Marcus feel small, like timing chain and compression and labor hours. Marcus stared at the cracked phone in his hand and pretended he understood. He didn't. What he understood was the number at the bottom. After that, he started walking. At first it felt like a temporary thing, like a bad week you just survive. Then it became the plan, the way a plan becomes a plan when there are no other options. 22 miles each way if he took the safest route that avoided the worst intersections. Some days he caught a bus for a few stops when he had cash. Most days he didn't. He left before the sky changed color so he could arrive early enough to not look like a problem. He kept his uniform shirt folded in his backpack so he wouldn't show up sweaty and embarrassed. People on the road saw him but didn't really see him. Drivers glanced and looked away. A woman in a white SUV once shouted, "Get a job," like it was advice and not an insult. Marcus didn't answer. He just kept walking. He had a job. He had 2, if you counted the one he did after work, the part where he sat at the kitchen table under the buzzing light and tried to stretch his bank account like it was dough. His phone was old and the screen had spiderweb cracks. He kept it on low power mode all the time. He stopped checking social media because it felt like watching other people breathe. Sometimes his sister Tasha texted him from Atlanta with pictures of her kids and voice notes that said things like "You good? You eating? You sleeping?" Marcus would type back short on time, "But I'm good. Always good." He didn't know how to tell her the truth without making it sound like he was asking for something. He had been married once.
Not a dramatic story.
Just 2 people who loved each other and then got tired in different directions. Rachel was a nurse. She worked long shifts and carried a kind of quiet authority that Marcus admired. In the last year they lived together, they talked less and less because every conversation turned into a budget meeting. When he lost his car, he saw the disappointment flicker across her face for half a second before she covered it with concern. That flicker lived in his chest like a stone. They separated in a practical way. No screaming. No police. No big scene. Rachel moved into a small place near her hospital. Marcus stayed in the apartment because it was cheaper and because he couldn't handle change on top of everything else. They still texted sometimes, but it was mostly logistics and old habits. Hope, reduced to the size of a notification. The terrifying part wasn't a monster. It wasn't some secret crime. It was the slow collapse that happened quietly while the world kept moving. It was how easy it was to become invisible, even when you were still working, still trying, still showing up. The week Dana Ruiz noticed him, Marcus had been sleeping in his empty bathtub with a folded towel under his head because the power had been cut off again and the air in the bedroom felt like a closed oven. He kept the curtains drawn because he didn't want neighbors to see him sitting in the dark. He didn't want anyone to offer help he couldn't pay back. On the night before Dana followed him, he stood at the sink and watched a thin stream of water run brown for a second before it cleared.
I drank anyway.
His stomach felt hollow but not hungry, more like his body had learned to stop asking. There was a letter on the counter that he didn't open because he already knew what it said. Past due. Final notice. In the morning, he walked past a Starbucks where the drive-through line wrapped around the building like a ribbon.
A kid in the passenger seat laughed at something on a tablet, face lit up like a little moon.
Marcus didn't resent them. He just felt like he was on the other side of a thick window. He kept moving because if he stopped, he was afraid he wouldn't start again. When Dana pulled up behind him with her hazards on, Marcus's first thought was not fear, exactly. It was dread mixed with embarrassment. He had spent months trying to look normal, to not be the kind of person cops noticed. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because attention meant questions, and questions meant telling the truth, and telling the truth meant admitting how close to the edge he was standing. Dana watched him from behind her windshield and did what good cops did when they remembered they were dealing with a human being. She didn't jump out fast. She didn't shout commands. She didn't treat him like a problem to control. She rolled down the window again and said, "Hey, I'm not trying to hassle you. I just see you out here a lot. It's dangerous with these trucks. You hurt.
You need water."
Marcus swallowed and tried to find the right face to wear.
The polite face. The strong face.
The face that said thanks but I'm fine. But his throat tightened anyway. He looked at the patrol car, at the bright morning, at the life that kept happening without him, and something in him cracked like a dry branch. "I'm headed to work," he said. His voice came out rough. "I just gotta get there." Dana nodded like that mattered. Like his work mattered. Like he mattered. "How far?"
Marcus hesitated.
He didn't want to say it because the number sounded like a joke someone would laugh at. He stared at the asphalt and finally answered, 22 miles. Dana's eyebrows lifted just a little. Then she looked past him, toward the long stretch of road and the heat already rising in waves. Her voice got softer. "That's a lot, man." Marcus gave a small shrug that was more pain than attitude. "It's what it is." Dana reached for the cup holder and held out a warm bottle of water from her cooler bag. Marcus took it like it was fragile. When his fingers touched the cold plastic, his eyes stung. That was the terrifying truth right there. Not that he was walking. Not that he was broke. It was that one small kindness could almost knock him over because he hadn't had any room left for it.
He twisted the cup and drank too fast.
Water spilled down his chin. He didn't wipe it right away. Dana didn't comment. She just said, "Tell me your name." "Marcus," he said.
"Marcus Hill."
"Okay, Marcus," she said. "I'm Dana. And I'm not gonna leave you out here if you're this far from help." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, to insist he didn't need saving, to keep his pride intact. But his phone buzzed again in his pocket and he didn't even have to look to know it was another warning, another reminder that time and money were running out together. He felt his shoulders shake once, just once, like his body was betraying him. Dana waited, giving him space like she understood that sometimes the hardest part wasn't surviving. It was letting someone see you doing it. Dana didn't rush him. That was the first thing Marcus noticed as they stood there on the shoulder of the road with cars sliding past like nothing important was happening. She didn't look at her watch. She didn't sigh. She just leaned against the open door of the patrol car like this conversation had room to breathe. "Where you working?" she asked, not like an interrogation, more like how someone asks what neighborhood you're from. Marcus told her the name of the warehouse. He expected her to react with pity or disbelief. She didn't. She nodded and said, "My cousin worked nights there for a while. Said it's brutal in the summer." That small detail landed differently than sympathy would have. It told Marcus she wasn't just seeing him as a situation. She was placing him in a real map, a real life. Dana offered him a ride, but not in a way that cornered him. "I can drop you closer," she said. "Or I can just pace you till you hit a safer stretch. Your call."
Marcus hesitated.
Every instinct he had said don't accept. Don't be a problem.
Don't owe anyone anything.
He had spent months building his days around not needing help because help came with strings, even when people said it didn't. "I don't want you getting in trouble," he said. It was an excuse, but it was also true.
Dana smiled a little.
Not a big smile.
Just a tired one.
"I won't. And even if I did, that'd be my choice." That word stuck with him. Choice. His life lately felt like a series of narrow paths where every turn had already been decided by numbers on a screen. Rent. Bills. Gas prices. He couldn't remember the last time he'd chosen something because he wanted to. He nodded once. That was all. Dana opened the back door and made it clear he could sit up front if he wanted.
Another small thing.
Another reminder that she wasn't trying to put him in a box. He chose the passenger seat. The vinyl was cool against his legs. He hadn't sat in a moving car in weeks. The sensation made his stomach flip. They drove in silence at first. The radio was low, some morning talk show arguing about sports in a way that sounded important and meaningless at the same time. Marcus watched the road pass by faster than his feet ever could. He felt relief and guilt tangled together, tight as a knot. After a mile or two, Dana spoke again. "How long you been doing that walk?" Marcus did the math without meaning to. "Since March." Dana let out a breath through her nose. "That's a long time." He shrugged.
You get used to it.
She glanced at him, then back at the road.
You don't get used to everything.
Sometimes you just stop noticing how hard it is. That landed closer to home than Marcus liked. He stared out the window at a strip mall waking up, lights flicking on one by one like the world stretching. Dana didn't ask him why he didn't have a car. She didn't ask him if he was on anything, or running from anything, or lying about anything. She asked him if he'd eaten. When he shook his head, she pulled into a gas station and bought 2 breakfast burritos and a cheap coffee that tasted like cardboard. Marcus tried to protest again. She cut him off gently. "I'm hungry too," she said, like that settled it. They sat on the curb by the pump and ate. The burrito burned his tongue. He didn't care. His hands were shaking a little as he unwrapped it. He hadn't realized how empty he was until there was something to fill it. Dana told him about her night shift, about a call that turned out to be nothing but scared people and a loose dog. She told him about her mom, who lived alone and called her every morning to complain about the news. Marcus found himself smiling without trying. It felt strange, like using a muscle he'd forgotten about. When he talked, it came out in pieces. The car. The job. The walking. The apartment with the power that went on and off like a bad joke. He skipped the worst parts. He always did. Dana listened like each piece mattered on its own. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it in big ways. She asked practical questions.
You got anyone local?
You ever talk to HR about schedule consistency?
You got steel toe boots?
It felt like being seen without being judged. That was the unexpected connection.
Not a miracle.
Not a rescue. Just 2 people sitting in the heat, sharing food, acknowledging reality without turning away from it. When they got closer to the warehouse, Marcus felt his chest tighten.
The old resistance rose up.
This was the point where things usually stopped. Where people said good luck and went back to their lives. Where hope showed up just long enough to hurt. Dana parked across the street and turned off the engine. "Listen," she said.
"I'm not gonna pretend I can solve everything."
"I can't. But I can do a couple things." Marcus's jaw clenched. He nodded, bracing himself. She handed him a card. Not flashy. Just her name and a number. "If you're ever in a spot that feels unsafe, call. Even if it's just hot and you need a ride part of the way." He stared at the card. Accepting it felt heavier than it should have. "I don't want special treatment," he said quietly.
Dana met his eyes.
"This isn't special.
This is human."
She also mentioned a community resource center a few miles from his apartment.
Job placement help.
Transportation vouchers. Not promises. Options. Marcus felt himself pulling back, the familiar urge to say thanks and then do nothing. He had learned not to trust systems that smiled at you and then lost your paperwork. "I'll think about it," he said. It was the truth. Thinking was as far as he could go right now. Dana nodded like she understood the limit. "That's fine." Before he got out, she added, "One more thing." He paused. "You walking all that way every day," she said. "That's not weakness. That's strength used up wrong."
"You don't owe suffering to anybody."
Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. The words sat in his chest, heavy and unfamiliar. Strength used up wrong. He watched her drive away and felt something shift, small but real. Not hope exactly. More like a crack in the wall he'd built to survive. At work, he moved through his shift with the same motions, the same sounds. But something was different. When his supervisor asked if he could stay late, Marcus hesitated instead of automatically saying yes. He thought about his body, about the walk home, about the fact that endurance wasn't infinite. He said no. His voice didn't shake. That night, back in his dark apartment, Marcus took out the card and set it on the table instead of shoving it in a drawer. He listened to a voicemail from Tasha he'd been avoiding. She said she missed him. She said, "Call me when you can. No pressure." He sat there longer than usual, thinking about how change didn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it showed up as a conversation on the side of the road. Sometimes it showed up as permission to admit you were tired.
That changed everything.
By July, Phoenix stopped pretending it was gentle. The air felt thick even before noon, like breathing through a towel. Marcus adjusted his schedule where he could, leaving earlier, walking slower, learning which gas stations let him refill his bottle without side eyes. He told himself he was managing. That was his favorite lie. The card from Dana stayed on the table. He didn't call. He told himself it was because he didn't want to bother her.
The truth sat deeper.
Calling meant admitting the situation wasn't temporary anymore. It meant naming the fear he kept stepping around. At work, the floor manager started watching him more closely.
Not in a cruel way.
In a cautious way. Marcus noticed it when he rubbed his knee after a long shift and caught the look. Concern mixed with calculation. How long before this guy becomes a liability? Marcus straightened up immediately. He learned to swallow pain the same way he swallowed worry, quickly and without comment. One afternoon, halfway through a shift, his vision went soft at the edges. Just for a second. Like the world blinked without asking him. He grabbed a pallet jack and leaned on it until the room settled. No one noticed. Or they did and chose not to. That choice hurt more than if they'd said something. On the walk home that night, the sun hadn't even set and the asphalt still radiated heat. His boots felt heavier than usual. Each step sent a dull ache up his shin. He stopped under a thin patch of shade cast by a billboard advertising luxury apartments he couldn't imagine living in. The irony didn't make him angry anymore. It just made him tired. He sat down on the curb, elbows on his knees, and stared at the traffic. Cars moved fast. People inside them talked and argued and planned dinners. Marcus felt like he was watching life through glass again. He thought about the word Dana had used. Strength used up wrong. His phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. Rachel. He almost didn't listen. He told himself it could wait.
Everything cold what?
That was the problem. He hit play anyway. Her voice was careful, like it always was now. Hey Marcus. I heard from Tasha. She's worried about you. I just wanted to check in. No pressure.
Just, call someone, okay.
That was it.
No accusation.
No blame. Just concern. It landed harder than anger would have. He felt his chest tighten, not with panic, but with something heavier. Grief, maybe. Not for the marriage exactly, but for the version of himself that hadn't been this worn down. He stood up and tried to keep walking. His leg gave out halfway through the next block. Not dramatically. Just enough to send him down on one knee. The pain shot sharp and immediate. He swore under his breath and stayed there longer than he meant to. People walked past. One man slowed, looked, then kept going. Marcus didn't blame him. Everyone had somewhere to be. Sitting there, sweat dripping down his back, something finally broke. Not in a loud way.
In a quiet, irreversible one.
He realized he couldn't keep surviving like this without losing something he wouldn't get back. His body. His job. His sense of being a person worth noticing. The terrifying truth wasn't that he might fail. It was that he was already failing slowly and calling it endurance. He took out Dana's card. His hands shook as he dialed.
It rang twice.
3 times. He almost hung up. Ruiz, she answered, voice steady. It's Marcus, he said. His throat tightened. I'm not okay. There was a pause, just long enough to let the words sit. Where are you? She asked. He told her. She said she was 10 minutes away. Marcus sat back on the curb and waited. For once, he didn't feel like running from the moment. Dana didn't make a big deal when she arrived. She helped him into the car, handed him a clean towel from the trunk, turned the AC up. We're gonna get you checked out, she said. Not a question. Not a threat. Just a statement.
At the urgent care, the fluorescent lights bust.
A nurse wrapped his knee, took his vitals, frowned at the numbers. Dehydration. Overuse.
Exhaustion.
Words that sounded clinical but felt personal. Dana waited in the plastic chair like she had nowhere else to be. Marcus stared at the floor and felt shame creep in. I didn't want this, he said. I didn't want to be the guy who couldn't handle it. Dana leaned forward. You handled it, she said. Longer than most would. That doesn't mean you have to keep paying the price. Later, sitting outside as the sky darkened, Marcus felt something close to relief. Not because things were fixed. They weren't. But because the truth was finally out in the open. He wasn't just tired. He was at a breaking point. Marcus didn't wake up the next morning feeling new or healed or suddenly optimistic. He woke up stiff and sore on a borrowed couch in Dana's spare room, staring at a ceiling fan that ticked slightly with every rotation. The house smelled like coffee and clean laundry. It felt strange to be somewhere that didn't feel temporary. Dana had insisted he stay the night after urgent care.
Not in a dramatic way. Just a simple you're not walking anywhere tonight.
He hadn't argued. That felt like its own small shift. He sat up slowly and tested his knee. It hurt, but in a manageable way. The kind of pain that came with a plan attached.
Easy.
Rest.
Physical limits.
He wasn't good at limits yet, but he was learning they existed whether he respected them or not. In the kitchen, Dana slid a mug across the counter and pointed at a chair. Sit, she said, like it was an invitation and a boundary at the same time. They talked like adults who understood that solutions were rarely clean. Dana helped him make a list, not written down, just spoken out loud. temporary ride shares with co-workers, a short-term transportation voucher from the community center she walked him into later that week, a conversation with HR that scared him but didn't destroy him. His hours stayed the same, but his shifts became consistent. Predictable. That mattered more than he expected. Marcus called Tasha from the porch that afternoon. The cicadas were loud. His voice shook when he told her the truth. Not the edited version. The real one. She didn't scold him. She didn't say I told you so. She just went quiet for a second and said, "Thank you for telling me." He cried after they hung up. Not from despair. From relief.
Rachel texted later.
Not about getting back together. About logistics. About closure. About caring without trying to fix. Marcus found he could hold that conversation now without shrinking. That felt like growth, even if it was small and bittersweet. He moved through the next weeks carefully. Not cautiously in a fearful way, but deliberately. He stopped measuring his worth by how much pain he could ignore. He learned to accept rides without turning them into debts. He went to the community center and filled out forms that asked uncomfortable questions. He answered them anyway. The terrifying truth didn't disappear. Life didn't suddenly become generous. His apartment was still too hot some nights. Money was still tight. But the loneliness loosened its grip. He wasn't invisible anymore. Not because he'd been rescued, but because he'd let himself be seen. One morning, months later, Marcus walked part of the way to work on purpose. Just a few miles. The sun was rising, painting the buildings in soft light. Dana passed by in her patrol car and gave him a nod instead of stopping. That mattered too. Independence and connection didn't have to cancel each other out. He arrived at work tired but steady. When a new hire complained about the heat, Marcus listened instead of brushing it off. Empathy had become something he practiced, not just something he needed. The small win wasn't a new car or a big promotion. It was waking up and not feeling like his life was closing in. It was knowing that asking for help didn't make him weak. It made him part of the world again. Sometimes progress looks like less weight on your shoulders. Sometimes it looks like a phone call you finally make. Marcus learned that persistence wasn't about suffering quietly. It was about choosing to keep going in a way that didn't erase you. If you've ever walked farther than you should have, carried more than you told anyone about, or waited too long to ask for help, you already understand his story. Maybe yours looks different. Maybe the miles aren't on the road. But the moment you stop pretending you're fine can be the moment things start to get better.